I'm hearing the beeps slow down a bit, so I think in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Bird. I am the DEC Clean Water Initiative Program Manager, and I'm going to be presenting an overview of our annual funding policy today and our spending plan for how we're going to be implementing our funding assistance for clean water projects. Today I have Jordan Geller and Rachel Wood joining me to help with the meeting logistics, including recording your questions that we'll get into at the end of the meeting, and also helping to monitor the teams admitting folks into the meeting and making sure that we're keeping mute on where appropriate to cut back on the background noise. So thanks everyone for bearing with us in this virtual format. I'm going to go ahead and get started. If there's any logistical issues throughout the meeting, please feel free to speak up or to notify us in the chat, but I'm just going to ask that we hold questions until the end of the presentation so we can get through all the material. And I thank you in advance for bearing with me. There's a lot of material to get through, and it isn't the most exciting material, so I'll try my best to get through it in an efficient and effective manner, and then there will hopefully be some time for discussion at the end. And I really appreciate all of you taking the time to join us today and to hear about this, and I really appreciate your partnership in this whole effort, so thank you. Okay, so I believe everyone can see my screen. A quick overview of the presentation for today. I'm going to give a little bit of background about our funding policy and its purpose, an overview of the funding policy contents, a summary of some of the major updates and clarifications that were made this year compared to the prior year, an overview of DEC and partner roles and responsibilities, our 7 screens that we use for determination of eligibility for funding, and then an overview toward the end of our spending plan, which takes our high-level statewide clean water budget and breaks it down into the Clean Water Initiative program specific funding initiatives. And then we'll have time for questions at the end. And I'll also go through our procedures for gathering and compiling question and answer complementary to the funding policy. Jumping into the background, the state of Vermont, we are pretty fortunate to have excellent water quality and great water resources, but we do have some water quality challenges. Most of the state of Vermont is covered by a water quality restoration plan known as a total maximum daily load, or TMDL, where we are targeting nutrient pollutant reduction. So for example, Lake Champlain is impaired for excess phosphorus, as well as Lake Memphremagog, that leads to an imbalance of phosphorus in the lake, which causes harmful and sometimes toxic blue-green algae blooms or cyanobacteria. And the eastern part of the state in the Connecticut River Basin, that flows to Long Island Sound, and Long Island Sound has a nitrogen imbalance, which causes low dissolved oxygen, which makes it difficult for aquatic life to survive in Long Island Sound. And in addition to these larger scale water quality challenges we are working to address, there's also local water quality challenges. And all of the projects that are funded through the Clean Water Initiative program at DEC must be targeting water quality improvements. And in particular, we work to address nutrient and sediment pollution. And we do this through a variety of different clean water projects funded across different land use sectors. The state of Vermont has an overarching clean water budget, and funds get allocated to different state agencies to implement clean water projects. For the most part, agricultural projects are going to be implemented through grant programs at the State Agency of Agriculture. Road projects are typically implemented through grant programs at the Agency of Transportation, or VTrans. And then most of the wastewater treatment efforts are funded through low interest loans administered by DEC through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. So when we're talking about the projects that the Clean Water Initiative program focuses on at DEC, most of those have to do with natural resource restoration and the treatment of stormwater from developed lands, although there may be some exceptions. And we utilize a scientific framework called tactical basin planning to inform our funding decisions. And basin plans cover the whole state. There's 15 major river basins or watersheds that are addressed that have specific tactical basin plans, and those are updated on a 5-year rotating schedule, overseen by basin planners that are housed in the Watershed Planning Program, which is our sibling program within the Water Investment Division. And tactical basin plans compile a lot of data information, sector-based assessments that identify projects and synthesize that into high-level priorities, as well as specific priority actions or projects that are updated continuously in the Watershed Projects database. And there's a link available here in the PowerPoint slides so you can go and see that database. So we really look to the basin planning process, and a number of our local and statewide partners do the same to figure out where we should be targeting funding for clean water projects. And each year, the state goes through a clean water budget process that is administered by the Clean Water Board. The Clean Water Board includes secretaries from the agencies of administration, commerce, community development, natural resources, agriculture, and transportation. I think I got all 5, as well as 4 public members that are appointed by the governor. And each year, the Clean Water Board goes through a public process to make its annual budget recommendation. Then that budget recommendation goes through the legislative process and is eventually signed into law as our state budget. And those funds flow to the various agencies that administer clean water funding. The DEC is one of those entities that receives a clean water funding appropriation. And the Clean Water Initiative program administers those funds. And so on the left here, we have a little infographic describing that Clean Water Board process. And then in the middle here is the funding policy. That's what we're here to discuss today. And that's really a communication tool that allows us to take that higher level budget and break it down into the specific funding initiatives that we plan to do over the course of a state fiscal year, and just defines the eligibilities associated with it. And as many of you know, as we fund those projects and those projects get completed, we are tracking those investments as well as the results of those investments and compiling it along with other state agency projects, funded projects, in our annual performance report. So really this is a cycle, and in a lot of ways there's a bit of a feedback loop as well, where we see what our results are in our investments, and then that also has that informs the planning process too, of where we may need to do more. So this is all part of that larger system that we're talking about for clean water support in the state. And the funding policy that we have been publishing each year, I believe since 2019, it serves as both an internal and external communication tool that we use to communicate the funding available any given year. For right now, we're talking about state fiscal year 2021, and what the anticipated funding opportunities are associated with that funding. It defines the DEC and grantee and contractor roles and responsibilities related to these funding programs, as well as criteria to determine the eligible uses of funds. That's at a very high level. And some of you may have connected the dots that state fiscal year goes from July 1st to June 30th, and we are more than halfway through state fiscal year 21, so why is this just coming out now? And I will just add that COVID-19 had quite an impact on the budget, and over the summer and fall we had to work on some budget adjustments related to these funds that we're talking about here that were negatively impacted by COVID's economic impact. And so we didn't have a fully approved budget until the fall, and also there have been some capacity shortages in our program. And so we are a little bit behind getting this out, but better late than never, I suppose. And I will share some good news for partners out there that we have received approval to recruit for a vacant position in our program, and hopefully we will be fully staffed soon. Just a little background on that. So now I'm going to jump into the contents of the funding policy. First, I want to highlight that if you go to our grants webpage, and you may have seen this in the announcement as well, in addition to posting the funding policy, we have posted a summary document that summarizes the major changes in each of the sections of the funding policy. So if you are already pretty familiar with our funding policy, this would be a good place for you to go to see what kinds of high-level changes were made and maybe to focus your review of the updated funding policy in those areas. So I'll just go through maybe kind of a high-level punch list of what some of those updates were. It clarifies roles and responsibilities. We reorganized the policy into 7 high-level eligibility screens, and all of those eligibility screens must be successfully completed in order for a project to be eligible for funding. For the first time, we're specifically defining the 3-acre general permit project eligibility. And there were some updates made to our standard milestones and deliverables. For a little bit of context on that, our program has a standard set of eligible project types, and associated with each of those project types, there is a table of the milestones and deliverables that are standardized so that all projects funded through our program follow that standardized path of milestones. And that's really important because it provides assurances that there will be consistency in how these projects are implemented, that we will be capturing the results of these projects consistently in our deliverables, and it also streamlines the process of developing the grant and contract agreements, making it a little bit more predictable and standardized. So for the first time, we have defined block grant milestones and deliverables in Appendix C. And then in addition to that, we have a section at the end of the policy that summarizes some of the anticipated future changes that are coming down the road. Many of you may be familiar with Act 76 of 2019. That will go into effect for state fiscal year 23. And it's going to restructure how we administer these grant funds. Most notably, the establishment of clean water service providers in Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog basins that will be operating under a formula grant. And then in addition to that, there's a lot of work happening within our agency to better address diversity, equity, inclusion, and environmental justice. And there's some consulting work underway that will result in some recommendations on how we can better address those considerations when we administer our funding programs. So high-level overview of some of those clarifications and updates. This slide is a lot of text, which I usually don't like to do, but I felt it was really important to take a little deeper dive and to synthesize eligibilities related to 3-acre general permit projects for you. So the 3-acre general permit is a pretty new stormwater permit in the state, and it requires that sites with 3 acres or more of impervious surface that are unpermitted or permitted prior to the 2002 standard implement stormwater treatment retrofits at those sites, and they meet the redevelopment standard in the state's stormwater management manual. In response to this, we've better defined what those eligibilities look like in our funding policy for state fiscal year 21. First, we've established a new project type in our eligible project types called Operational Stormwater General Permit. And that covers the milestones and deliverables associated with design and permitting related to a 3-acre site. And then when those stormwater treatment practices are ready for construction, that would fall under our stormwater implementation project type. And just a quick sidebar to clarify, When we're talking about operational stormwater permit projects, we are only talking about funding projects that result in treatment of existing impervious surfaces. Any stormwater treatment associated with the treatment of new impervious surfaces or new development are not eligible for grant funding through our program. So I just wanted to make that distinction. Like all projects, 3-acre projects must meet all of the eligibility screens in the funding policy to be able to receive funding. Any state-funded 3-acre project would be ineligible to receive the impact fees. Under the 3-acre permit, if a project goes above and beyond the redevelopment standard, then that permittee may be eligible to receive some additional funding from an impact fee pool. And if the state is funding your 3-acre project, we don't want to also be having the state pay those additional incentives to the permittee. Any of the design and construction under a 3-acre project must be setting the full site up for full compliance. So we want to make sure that the full site is addressed in the design, permitting, and construction. And we also require that a permit be obtained before construction, because we want to make sure that before we go down the path of investing in construction, that we're setting up the whole site for compliance. And currently, the 3-acre permit is going to be rolled out in stages. And right now, Champlain and Memphremagog basins, as well as stormwater impaired waters in the Killington area, are the only 3-acre projects in the state that are under the 2023 deadline. Any potential 3-acre sites in the rest of the state will be under a 2033 deadline. And so right now, when we're talking about 3-acre permit funding, we're really focused on the Lake Champlain, Lake Memphremagog, and stormwater impaired sites. That said, if there's a stormwater treatment practice in a part of the state that is not under that 2033 or 2023 deadline, we would still like the design to be keeping in mind that future 3-acre requirement and to meet that redevelopment standard, so that when the permit does become applicable in the other parts of the state, that we're setting those sites up for compliance. And one last clarification. There are application fees associated with permit obtainment. That is an eligible expense under our funding policy, but the subsequent annual fees or any resulting impact fees, and the impact fees would be something that the permittee has to pay if they're not able to meet the redevelopment standard for the whole site. Those are not eligible for funding under our policy. So I'm going to leave the 3-acre permit there for now, but I wanted to go through some of those details with you all because it represents a pretty major clarification of our funding policy compared to last year. So now I'm going to go over DEC and partner roles and responsibilities. So within DEC, we have 3 major entities at play. The Clean Water Initiative Program, which I work for. We'll talk about our roles and responsibilities. We partner with the DEC Administration and Innovation Division when we administer our grant programs, and then there's DEC technical project managers involved with the management of all these projects. And then as well, we have our external grantees and contractors that we work with and really make all of this possible. So I'll just walk you through high level what the roles and responsibilities are. So CWIP, or the Clean Water Initiative Program, we establish our funding policy and our spending plan, and we coordinate within DEC with the Administration Innovation Division, technical project managers to facilitate that workload queue. We monitor our funding initiatives and oversee the technical closeout and reporting of these projects. The Administration and Innovation Division provides the administrative processing support and financial management associated with our programs. And so that involves a grant management specialist, or GMS, you may have heard us refer to, who helps to facilitate the competitive procurement of our funding opportunities, posting things like a request for proposals, supporting the agreement development and execution, invoice payment, and agreement closeout. And then each of our grant or contracts has a DEC technical project manager. The project manager would establish the scope of work when we go out to RFP, as well as in working with the selected entity to establish that scope of work into an agreement, a grant, or a contract. And then the technical project manager provides oversight of the deliverables, approves deliverables and invoices. And then grantees and contractors on the external end are responsible for adhering to this funding policy and the terms of the DEC grant or contract agreements, adhering to our standard milestones in deliverables, and ensuring that the funds support water quality goals. And now I'm going to just walk through the 7 eligibility screens that are in the funding policy. And I'm probably going to spend more time on the eligibility screens that represent newly defined policy elements. So the first screen is maybe the simplest. Based on the project type, is it eligible to receive funding with our program? Appendix B of the funding policy defines all of the eligible project types. The policy also includes some examples of ineligible project types based on questions and experience in the past. And new this year, and I just walked you through, is some of the specifics related to 3-acre general permit project eligibility requirements. The second eligibility screen has to do with the budget of a project. So the agreement or sub-agreement budgets must only include eligible expenses. And there are some examples of ineligible expenses in the policy. And the policy also defines for block grants the allowable expenses related to administering a block grant program that we call program delivery versus project costs for projects funded under a block grant. So that's defined there. No major changes compared to last year. One clarification that we've added has to do with funding related to co-benefits. So as I mentioned before, all of this funding must be used to provide water quality benefit, either protecting or restoring water quality. And in a lot of cases, a project that accomplishes water quality improvement has co-benefits that come along with it. That's great. That's all very good and encouraged. Where there is a co-benefit that the grant recipient is attempting to support, that results in an added cost above and beyond what it would cost to achieve that water quality benefit, then we would expect that other funding sources related to that co-benefit be leveraged toward the project. So for example, these funds are all meant to be used to support the implementation of clean water projects, the development, design, and implementation of clean water projects that produce that water quality benefit. And let's say you were doing a implementation project but wanted to provide some complementary educational signage associated with the project. We would ask that the local partner pursue other funding sources where educational materials, signage are an eligible use of funding. So that's one example. But there may be a lot of cases where the co-benefit doesn't result in an extra cost. So we may fund a restoration of a floodplain. The floodplain restoration provides a water quality benefit. It also provides flood resilience, and that doesn't necessarily result in an extra cost. All good. So I just wanted to spend a little time clarifying that. And then the last bullet here, that is also a clarification, and it probably sounds a lot like common sense, but when you receive a grant or a contract, if you're going through a procurement process to subaward or to gather materials for the project, we will ask that recipients of these funds make every effort to use the lowest cost materials available, as well as locally sourced materials where available, to achieve the project outcomes. And in some cases, if, let's say, the landowner prefers a higher cost option above and beyond the cost that's necessary to achieve that water quality benefit, we would ask that that landowner chip in the extra funding to make that possible. Again, this is all, I think, probably already being implemented in all of our funding programs. Just some clarification to make sure that we are putting these dollars to good use and protecting that public investment. Eligibility screen number 3 is the applicant eligible to receive and administer QIP funding. So the funding policy defines eligible entities and ineligible entities. Ineligible entities include private citizens and individuals, private for-profit businesses, although you may note that engineering or consulting firms may be an exception to that, and they are included on the eligible side of this table. Private for-profit colleges and universities, federal agencies, and DEC programs are ineligible to receive and administer these funds. And on the left-hand side, you can see the eligible entities. Many of you are here with us today. And one new element to the funding policy: an eligible entity on the left side here may obtain QIP funds and administer a project on land owned by an ineligible entity if that entity or landowner meets the next screen, screen number 4. So we'll get into that. Screen number 4 is new to the funding policy. More specifically, what I have put in this orange box here shows what is newly defined. The rest is not really new information, just more of a new way of presenting it in a decision tree. So this is a decision tree for determining eligibility based on the landowner type and regulatory considerations. If the landowner associated with the project is a public landowner, then it's pretty much going to be eligible for funding. If it's a non-regulatory project, it's eligible. If it's a regulatory project and it has to do with the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, or MS4 permit, or an operational stormwater general permit, such as the 3-acre general permit, it is eligible for funding. If the project's a regulatory and compelled by the Municipal Road General Permit or the road standards in the MS4 permit, it is not eligible. They should go to VTrans for funding. If the project landowner is private and non-regulatory, the project is non-regulatory, it is eligible for funding. And that's often the case with things like a natural resource restoration project, where those often occur on private land. If it's a regulatory project, and I'm going to start with the ineligible branch here, and it's compelled by the required agricultural practices or farm operational permits, it is not eligible and should pursue funding through the State Agency of Agriculture or the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And then if it's a private landowner regulatory project under the Operational Stormwater General Permit, such as the 3-acre general permit, then there's 2 branches here. A private landowner in state fiscal year 21 under the 3-acre permit is eligible for funding for design and permitting, but we are not yet going to provide grant funding for a private landowner to do a 3-acre project all the way through to construction. Those landowners or permittees have until 2023 to get permit coverage and then they have 5 years to construct. So this is just for state fiscal year 21. We are in the process under Act 76 of developing a developed lands grant program that will provide funding and financing to landowners affected by the 3-acre permit. So this is really an interim measure until that program is up and running. Okay, we're getting there. Eligibility screen number 5 has to do with the implementation of projects that may cause a negative impact to natural resources. This decision tree is not new. This was in the policy last year, and it defines if a project is eligible for funding, if the project type is eligible for funding, I should say, and the project may impact either a wetland or wetland buffer, river corridor or floodplain area, or lake shoreland protection zone, then the grant recipient or contractor must contact the Wetlands Program, Rivers Program, or Lakes and Ponds Program to determine permitting needs and eligibility related to water quality impact. And that whole decision-making process is spelled out in this decision tree. I'll also note that we have a water quality project screening tool that is linked at the right here. And with this tool, you can go in, put your project location, and it will tell you who those regulatory points of contact are in each of those programs. So you know exactly who to contact to make this determination. And I'll just add, in addition to that, Ethan Swift in the Watershed Planning Program at DEC is developing a standard operating procedure that will facilitate this whole process. And so we anticipate that there will be some improvements coming down the pike related to supporting this process. And please stay tuned, and we'll be sure to get the word out once that's in place. And this tool is linked in the funding policy document as well. Number 7 is leveraged funds. The policy changes terminology. We used to refer to this as match, and now we're referring to it as leveraged funds, mainly because DEC is not using these leveraged funds to meet our own match requirements. We are requiring leverage funding and incentivizing leverage funding in order to bring more funding to the table for clean water work. And this decision tree is a new addition, but really the only part that is a newly defined leverage funds requirement is in this orange box. So I'll just walk you through what this is telling us. So within the realm of eligible project types, leverage requirements may be in place depending on regulatory considerations and the landowner or permittee type. So the first question in this decision tree is the project required or compelled by a water quality related regulatory program? If it's a non-regulatory project, there's no match or no leveraging requirement, but it may be incentivized in the scoring process. So projects that would otherwise be equal, one brings more leveraging to the table, may be scored more favorably in the review process, is what we mean by incentivizing the leveraging. If it's a regulatory project on this right-hand side, and it is compelled by or supporting the municipal road general permit, I mentioned earlier that most of the road projects we fund, the state funds go through the Agency of Transportation. However, we are providing some funding to municipalities to purchase equipment that supports the municipal road general permit. And we've aligned that match requirement or leveraging requirement with VTrans, where the state will pay 80% of the equipment and the municipality pays 20%. So that's not new, but it is newly displayed in this decision tree. And then on the left-hand side of the regulatory branch, if the project is required by the MS4 permit or an operational stormwater general permit, such as the 3-acre permit, the next question is, what is the entity of, what type of entity is the landowner or permittee? If it's an MS4 community, which is, we have those all defined in the policy as well, then there is a 50% leveraging requirement where the state will pay half of the project cost and the MS4 pays the other half. Newly defined are in this orange box. So what is new in this policy is we have what we call a public-private partnership for stormwater regulation. And in any, as I guess, first I'll define what that means. So a partnership supports the compliance with a stormwater regulation in a more effective manner by installing a stormwater treatment practice that achieves both the private landowner 3-acre compliance and one or both of the following. So it may be the MS4 or a municipal operational permit requirement, or it may be achieving additional treatment that is non-regulatory offsite. And we're really trying to incentivize these public-private partnerships because it achieves stormwater treatment in a more cost-effective and efficient manner. And it also builds partnerships and capacity related to stormwater treatment. So even if you're an MS4 community where you'd otherwise have that 50% match requirement, if you are pursuing a stormwater treatment that supports the MS4 stormwater regulation and that private 3-acre compliance, then that 50% match requirement is waived under a public-private partnership. Similarly, if it's a non-MS4 municipality partnering with a private entity, there is no leverage funds required. So that's this branch here related to the public-private partnership. And then if it's a non-MS4 community working to implement the 3-acre general permit, there is no leveraging required. And then if it's a project purely addressing compliance for a private landowner or permittee, then there is the 50% leveraging requirement. So thank you for bearing with me through that. The funding policy defines all of the terms used in this figure and provides a little bit more background on the rationale behind these leveraging requirements. And then the final eligibility screen, number 7, has to do with the long-term operation and maintenance of projects. In order for a construction or implementation project to be eligible for funding, there must be an operation and maintenance plan and agreement in place. Our program has established a standard template that is required to be used for these plans and agreements. And you can find those on our grants webpage, and it's baked into our standard milestones and deliverables. Now I'm going to get into the budget a little bit more. I mentioned earlier that the state has a statewide clean water budget process that's informed by the Clean Water Board recommendation. This table here from Appendix A in the funding policy provides an excerpt of the line items from that statewide budget that are administered by the Clean Water Initiative program. So we have about $2.4 million doing multi-sector innovation and partner support work, $3.2 million for natural resource restoration, $50,000 is transferred into the Lakes in Crisis Fund to support the Lake in Crisis Response Plan for Lake Carmi, and that's administered primarily by the Lakes and Ponds program at DEC. And then we have $3.8 million for stormwater project planning and implementation. And then there's $110,000 that supports wastewater treatment facility operator support technical assistance. So in total, state fiscal year 21, our program is administering $9.6 million from the Clean Water Fund. And if you look at Appendix A of the policy, there is a table that shows how we break down this higher level budget into specific funding initiatives. And you can see this column here, clean water budget line item, allows you to crosswalk it back to this higher level budget. So you can go there for the full funding policy spending plan. This is subject to change throughout the year. It is a communication tool to communicate what funding programs are likely to be available. As we go through these funding programs, if there's less demand than we thought for one specific program and it comes out under budget, we may reprogram funding to meet demand in other areas, for example. The following slides I'm going to go through now are a more detailed overview of some of the funding opportunities that are more generally available to external partners in that spending plan. Okay, so this slide focuses on planning and project identification and development efforts we plan to target this year. Many of you are familiar with the Tactical Basin Planning Support funding that goes to conservation districts, regional planning commission, and watershed organizations that supports participation in the development of tactical basin plans. So that is included here at $500,000. And we anticipate as well, we're working on currently developing startup grants with the selected clean water service providers, getting their organizational capacity in place and establishing basin water quality councils in preparation for those new water quality restoration formula grants that are coming down the pike under Act 76. And then in the project identification category, these are sector-based assessments, geographically targeted for the purposes of identifying and prioritizing clean water projects. And we have been working with the Rivers Program and Lakes Program and Basin Planners to put these together. There will be an RFP coming out for stream geomorphic assessment and river corridor plans, lake watershed action plans, and lake-wise assessments, as well as stormwater master planning. And then related to project development, we do anticipate there will be another round of project development block grants. This supports taking a project that was identified and prioritized already through one of these project identification efforts and doing the necessary work to get those projects prepared for the next step, whether it be design or implementation. And that includes doing landowner outreach to build support for participation in the projects. Next slide has a summary of design and implementation funding available this year. We're in the process of getting an RFP out for a dam removal design and implementation grant round, funded at about $500,000. And my next slide summarizes some of the funding initiatives available through a separate pool of funding through the Lake Champlain Basin Program. But this Green Schools initiative is for Lake Memphremagog is complementary to one of those, to the Green Schools initiative funded through the Lake Champlain Basin Program to support the design and permit obtainment for up to 4 of the 3-acre general permit schools in the Lake Memphremagog Basin. And we're continuing through the renewal of the existing design and implementation block grants that are currently held and administered by South Windsor County Regional Planning Commission, recently renamed to Mount Ascutney Regional Commission. I hope I got that right. And Watersheds United Vermont and the Natural Resource Conservation Council. So those design and implementation block grants are used to support stormwater and natural resource restoration projects identified in tactical basin plans. And new this year, there's a specific amount of funding within that that's specifically targeting 3-acre general permit projects. I already mentioned that we provide some funding assistance to municipalities to purchase equipment that supports implementation of the municipal road general permit. We've been doing this for a few years now, targeting 3 of the 15 basin planning watersheds in the state each year. So this year, Otter Creek, Passumpsic, and Winooski River watersheds are up for eligible purchase of equipment. There has already been a grant round for the river corridor easement grants, and we are planning to do a second round for the remaining funding at $1 million to support the implementation of river corridor easements. There will also be a renewal of our Woody Riparian Buffer Block Grant at $250,000. And then finally, continuing the watershed work group block grants that support the work group capacity to implement clean water projects identified in tactical basin plans. This slide here is a snapshot from the funding policy summarizing the Lake Champlain Basin Program federally funded projects that are being administered by the Clean Water Initiative program. So in addition to the state clean water funding, we also manage quite a bit of funding that flows through the Basin program. And there's a table summarizing all of the funding initiatives that approximately align with state fiscal year 2021. Of note is the Green Schools Initiative that will support schools in the Lake Champlain Basin to comply with the 3-acre general permit. And because the 3-acre general permit is kind of a hot topic, as you can probably tell by the focus of it in the funding policy, this slide summarizes the different funding avenues available in state fiscal year 21 for 3-acre projects. So if it's a public school or a state college, they are eligible for funding through the Green Schools Initiative at 100% for design, permit obtainment, and construction. If it's a public permittee, then they are eligible for funding through the Design Implementation Block Grant at 100% of the cost for design, permit, and construction. If it's an MS4 community, it is also eligible through Design Implementation Block Grants with for 50% of the project cost. If it's a project being done through a stormwater regulatory public-private partnership, that is also eligible through the Design Implementation Block Grants at 100% of the design, permit, and construction costs. And if it's a private permittee, then it would be eligible through the Design Implementation Block Grant if the grant is being administered by an entity eligible to receive QIP funding, and they would be eligible for 50% of the design and permit obtainment cost. As I noted before, construction is not yet an eligible expense for private entities doing 3-acre permit projects as of state fiscal year 2021. So for more information, you can access this funding policy and complementary documents, including the summary of changes, on our grants webpage. There's a button at the top of our grants webpage where you can subscribe to our grants notification list to hear about other funding opportunities. We send out announcements of requests for proposals there. And now, congratulations to all of you for listening to me talk about this funding policy for 50 minutes. Thank you for bearing with me. Now we are in the question and answer segment. I will just add before we jump into it that we are going to be compiling a document of questions and answers related to the funding policy. If you have any questions, please submit them to this email address with the email subject QIP Funding Policy Q&A by 4 o'clock on Thursday, March 4th. We're going to compile all of those questions and answer them and post that Q&A document to our webpage by March 12th. We have some time to go through questions now. If it's a clarification question, I will be happy to answer it during this Q&A session. If it's a trickier question that involves further defining of our policy, I will politely thank you for your question and take some time to more thoughtfully answer those questions as part of this Q&A document process. Does that sound good? Okay, thank you. I think, I forget, Jordan or Rachel has been monitoring the Q&A in the chat if there are any. And so we could start with any questions that have come through the chat. And then you could also, I think, raise your hand and we can start to chip away at some of these questions.
Emily, we do have 2 questions in the chat. Sue asked, has the definition of 3 acres changed?
I don't believe it has. When it comes to the regulatory requirements, I would definitely recommend contacting the DEC Stormwater Program to be sure.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. And then Sue's second question is the O&M template required? Can there be any additional information put into the agreement?
Absolutely. The O&M template is required to ensure that we're gathering consistent information on O&M responsible parties and all the data we need for follow-up and verification further down the road. But there is a pretty flexible section of the agreement that allows customizing of the O&M plan based on that specific project. So that would be a place where you could add in any additional details that you wanted to note related to operation and maintenance.
Thank you. And we did have a few more questions trickle in from the chat. Mark Shea asked, does a public entity need a valid permit in place for funding?
I think that's probably related to the 3-acre general permit. Mark, could you clarify that?
Yes, right now we're out of permit, and we got a small site that has 3 acres of impervious, and we've been working with the engineers in the state for about 1.5 years, 2 years, to get up to speed and to get some facilities that the cost of this is outrageous. So we're looking to see if we can offset this through some grant. We've already paid a lot of money in engineering, and we're still working with the state to come up with a cost-effective approach. But right now we are out of permit, and what we want to do with this project is to be in permit and to have comply with the 3-acre rule. So can we apply for it? Hoping that within all the engineering costs and all the approved work, we will be in permit. So that will qualify us for this grant.
Yeah, so if you are a 3-acre site and you meet the eligibility requirements of the funding policy and you don't yet have a permit, there is the project type you could pursue funding for that would support the design and permit obtainment costs. Then you need to obtain full permit coverage before being eligible to pursue funding for construction. I hope that helps. So I guess it depends on your permit status. If you already have a permit and you're covered, then you could pursue, I think, assuming all the eligibility screens are met, funding for construction. If you don't yet have a permit or design engineering, that is also an option to get coverage under the grant programs.
So it looks like we need to go to the design and permit approach.
Okay. Yep. And in state fiscal year 2021, that there will be funds available through the design implementation block grants with the Mount Escutney Regional Commission, the Natural Resource Conservation Council, and Watersheds United Vermont, and they will be getting the word out as their funding opportunities become available, and we'll be working to coordinate with them to make that information available on our grant webpage as well. Thanks, Mark. Good luck.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Okay, our next question is from Meg, and they asked if implementation work is done on a private lakeshore property where the landowner is partnering with their lake association, which party is responsible for signing the O&M?
Sure. I'm going to switch back to that slide, I think.
Emily, do you want me to jump in?
Go for it, Helen. You're the expert. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Meg. I can jump in here. It's a great question. We've had some back and forth on this in previous projects, but I guess in general, the person who signs the operation and maintenance agreement, it should be the one who is responsible for maintaining that practice. So that could be the landowner, or it could be the lake association, and that's kind of something that they need to figure out. So if there's specific questions, we're happy to work with you on kind of the language or the, I guess who's signing it. But we refer to whoever is signing it as the responsible party. So that would be kind of the contact for us if we go to visit the site. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you, Helen.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, next question. From Kathy, does this mean that the ecosystem restoration program grant is disappearing, or will that still be in place?
Yeah, and so many of you may be familiar with, we used to hold more general grant rounds where there was really broad eligibility, many different projects types would be eligible. We would have one grant round, review and score all of those projects. We've sort of been shifting away from that model where we're trying to, well, we've been developing more of the block grant approaches from a capacity standpoint and getting prepared for Act 76, as many of you may be aware. And we are still offering individual or non-block grant rounds, I guess you could say, that fall under that ecosystem restoration header, but we're trying to group them more by similar project types so that it is more effective in terms of project scoring. So I just switched back to this slide that shows the dam removal grant round that will be happening, the river corridor easement grant round that is happening. There's going to be the woody buffer block grant continuing. So we're still, I guess, long-winded way of saying that we're continuing to support all of those project types, but doing it in a little bit more of a structured manner where we're bundling different grant programs by similar project types and then building capacity in the block grant area. So in terms of individual grant programs that we are continuing in FY21, dam removal, river corridor easements, and then I mentioned before the project identification, so the stream geomorphic assessment, river corridor planning, the lake watershed action plans and lake-wise assessments, and the stormwater master plans. And then any projects that are eligible through a specific program, like the woody buffer block grants or the river corridor easement grants, those are not eligible through the design implementation block grant. So we're trying to provide more consistent buckets of funding programs where different project types are eligible. I hope that, so it has evolved, but we're still finding a home for all of those important projects to be funded.
Okay, next question from Lynn is clarifying that all projects under existing grant agreements with DEC, including block grants, will utilize the previous funding policy.
Yep, so if you already have a grant agreement that was executed in the past, that would be based on whatever funding policy was in effect at that point in time. Where you do have opportunities to incorporate some of these updated considerations, go for it. That would be great. But yeah, any new agreements moving forward, including renewals to existing agreements, we will want to make sure that this new policy is put into effect.
Thank you. And next question from Jay. Is there an ETA for dam removal application rollout?
Emily, you need to take that?
Yes, thanks, Marley.
Yeah, Jay, this is Marley Roop. The dam removal RFP is written and in the hands of the grant management specialist right now. This, as well as other amendments, we're just waiting pending the release of this policy, so everyone would know exactly what the policy said before they were signing up for any new grant agreements. So I would expect it within a week or 10 days at the latest.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you, Marley. Okay, so we are at time.
Emily, Lynn had her hand up. I just want to make, and it's been up for a while. I want to make sure that she got that question answered if it was different from the one in the chat.
Oh, sorry about that. Hi, Lynn.
Hi, I actually, sorry, I do have a few other questions, but I'm happy to kind of submit them in writing or talk offline because I know we're at 3 o'clock. So that's totally fine for me to ask them at another time.
Yeah, that sounds good, Lynn. Thank you for submitting those in writing. And like I said before, we will address questions that were raised here during this virtual meeting in that Q&A document, as well as any that are submitted through the email instructions in that Q&A document we'll be posting by Friday, March 12th. So take a look at that website to have your answers to your questions. And feel free to reach out to me if there's any specific needs or points of clarification. Happy to dialogue, and we will be following up with the administrators of the 3 design implementation block grants to have a little bit more dialogue if helpful, so that you feel prepared to implement this funding policy as well. So.
And Lynn, since you were trying to ask this before the end of the meeting, if you submit those questions, we'd be happy to get back to you quickly and not make you wait until March 12th for the answers, not to keep you on the edge of your seat. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate your time and participation and all the work you do to get these projects out on the ground and improve water quality. And we will keep the dialogue going, and I hope everyone has a good afternoon. Thank you. Bye.